What is the most mysterious paranormal thing you've witnessed? I was in 7th grade and we just moved into a mill townhouse, one of the houses built close by a dam and textile mill that used to house the families of mill workers. The upstairs area always gave me an eerie feeling, but I shrugged it off as the discomfort of living in a new place. From the beginning I had trouble sleeping, and was jolted awake in the middle of the night repeatedly for no apparent reason. Then, I started hearing the thumping. It started as occasional, soft thumps, seemingly coming from the attic. I had my dad check it out to ease my mind, but he found no explanation. Fast forward a few weeks, the occasional knocking was becoming louder and I continued to wake up in the middle of the night. One night I was jolted awake again, but this time I heard a loud bang accompanied by the sound of breaking plastic. I looked to my window across the room, and the blinds had been completely torn and were in disarray. My door was closed, the windows were closed, and the house was locked up tight. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. I made it downstairs pretty quickly and the sound woke my parents, so they went upstairs to check it out. They found no cause or explanation. I slept on the couch downstairs until we moved shortly afterwards. An update to the original. My parents still live in a neighborhood not far from the house, and I've noticed that it never keeps an occupant for too long. Also, I never experienced anything similar until this year. I live in an apartment with 3 other people, and on occasions on which one of us has been home alone around 2 AM, we've heard knocking sounds as if someone is at the door. In my roommate's experience, the knocking quit when she answered the front door. In my experience, the knocking stopped when I turned the lights on. It's pretty eerie. My father passed away last year. One item he always said he wanted me to have was a shotgun which had originally belonged to his grandfather. For years he had this shotgun stashed in the attic. After he passed, I had gone in the attic to look for it, only to find that it wasn't there. A few months later, I had a dream in which I was talking to him and I asked him where he had put the shotgun. He told me it was in the closet of a spare bedroom. I called my mother and had her check, and sure enough that's where it was. Now it's completely possible that my father had told me that when he was alive, and the dream was little more than a memory, but I certainly don't recall that being the case. Scariest moment of my life happened while my friend and I were camping in eastern Canada as teenagers. We decided to sleep in this abandoned camper we found deep in a large forest that was near our town. It had been there so long that small trees had grown around it. We'd stumbled across it when we were exploring a few months back and thought it would be cool and brave to sleep there for a night. So one weekend we did it. We arrived after dark because we had gotten lost trying to find the camper. We had a really low power flashlight, so it made it even more difficult. Once we finally found it, we opened the rusty door and stepped in. The sounds inside the camper were shrill and itchy. There were typical camper things strewn about: cups, empty cans, swollen Pulp Fiction novels. Already tired, we holed up in one end of the camper where the bed area had originally been before the cushions had rotted away to almost nothing. A long hallway stretched the length of the camper so we could basically see from end to end. It was a miserable night. There were several rats living in there. I saw them staring at us from a chewed out part of the ceiling. When the wind blew outside, the camper would shriek and groan. We even thought we heard a bear outside too, walking around. Still, we feigned bravery and acted like we were having a good time. But we were on edge. At some point I woke up from an uncomfortable sleep. I sat up to adjust myself when I noticed some movement out of the corner of my eye. At the other end of the camper, there was a small window, and as I looked at it I saw a man's silhouette. He was clearly staring straight at me from outside. At first I thought maybe it was a weird shape of a tree or something. But when I moved a bit to get a better look, the person clearly reacted and then froze. My heart was pumping and I woke up my friend immediately, saying someone is here over and over and over in a whisper, not taking my eyes off his profile. He woke up immediately and I nodded towards the window. He saw him too. We whispered frantically about who it could be and why was he staring at us. And for the next 10 minutes, no joke, we stared him down. The longer we stared at him, the more frightened we got. Occasionally he would move, but always keeping his eyes locked on us. Eventually I shouted at him, "Hey!" No reaction. My friend was braver than me and decided to shine the flashlight at him. As soon as he did, we realized our horrible mistake. It wasn't a window at all on the other side of the camper. It was a mirror. We had been staring down ourselves from the very start. Completely idiotic. Still, it was the most fearful, relieving and funny moment of my life that I'll never forget it. Closest to paranormal I've ever been. I was so scared reading this. What a great ending. My mom told me this story the other day and it freaked me the frick out. When my oldest sister was little, like 3, she asked my then pregnant aunt to pick her up to hold her. My mom said she was like, "She can't pick you up, honey, she has a baby in her tummy." And then my little sister was like, "That baby is dead." My mom freaked out, but my aunt and grandma were fine and were telling my mom it was all good. She was just a toddler and didn't know what she was saying. Well, lo and behold, my aunt goes to the doctor the next day for a routine pregnancy checkup and the baby was dead. Give me willies just thinking about it. When I was 15, my mother and I were standing in the kitchen talking. There was a rack on the wall holding keys about 8 feet away. A key from the rack flew across the room and hit the floor near our feet. This is the only event in my life for which I have no explanation. My grandfather passed away just a few weeks after I was born. Never met the guy, never knew what he looked like. When I was 5 years old, I started to see this man in our rocking chair. I called him the rocking chair man. My parents thought it was that imaginary friend stage, but it started to bug them when I told them every single day. They finally questioned me about it. I told them every detail I could remember and finally they showed me a picture of a man. It was my grandfather. To this day, I'm 22 now, every time I dream, he is in the background somewhere. I remember when I dreamed about my high school graduation and I looked in the stands and I saw him with my parents. I like to think that he's just watching out for me and being there when he's not really there. So I am a true believer of the paranormal. About 20 years ago, my mom came out of the shower, pale, shaking, and hysterical. My aunt spoke to me and she is here to pick someone up. I know she is talking about my father, she said to my dad and I. Her aunt has been dead for many years. 2 days later, my grandfather, mom's father, was in the hospital. He was in a coma and died shortly after that from undetected lung cancer. I hear very often about dead family members appearing when someone in the family is going to die. To come get them. I'd like to see if anyone else has a similar story. My aunt, a woman who to my knowledge has never told me an untruth. Around Easter time many years ago the family was eagerly awaiting her grandma, my great-grandma, to arrive to celebrate with them. She was due Friday, Thursday night. After everyone had went to bed, my aunt was woken by a hand on her shoulder. She looked up and, much to her surprise, saw grandma smiling down at her. All grandma said was that she was very, very sorry for not being able to be there for Easter. She wished my aunt a good night and said she was glad she got to see her before she went. My aunt thought nothing of it and went to bed. The next morning they got the phone call that grandma has passed away in her sleep the previous night. My company HQ in Germany was supposedly haunted. I figured the guys, Co's and even the one SGT were just fricking with me before I had to be CQ. So it's like 2 AM and I start hearing crap coming from upstairs. A broom being pushed down the hallway, voices, heck I even smelled cigarette smoke. I go outside to see if there are any cars in the lot. Even though to get into the building you had to go right past me. Nobody parked outside. I go back inside. I'm still hearing voices and the other stuff. I slowly creep up the stairs and I can clearly hear the voice speaking German. I get to the top. Nothing. No people. Voices are gone. No brooms left out. But the smell of cigarettes was still in the air. That's what I'm going to do if I come back as a ghost. Start sweeping an office building. My mom grew up in a rural part of Guatemala where witchcraft was a real thing and has so many stories of the weird crap she and her brothers and sisters experienced there. Of all the stories she tells, the creepiest one deals with a young apprentice to a witch doctor who traveled around the country healing people. He was murdered west of Guatemala City and they had arranged to bring his body back to be buried there. They paid bottom dollar to have some poor bastard go pick up the body and bring it back in his pickup truck. The guy gets there, loads the coffin on his truck and starts heading back, but his truck breaks down on the way. He gets out and frantically tries to get the truck back on the road, as he has to be back in time for the services to start. He is completely alone in the dark hours of the early morning and a man in a nice suit comes from out of nowhere to help him out. The man gets his truck back in working order and walks back down the road into the darkness. The guy gets the body back in time, and after some prep, they begin the services. He happens to walk by the open coffin to pay his respects and sees that the dead man in the coffin is the very same man who had helped him with his truck. To this day, I get shivers thinking about it. About 10 years ago, I was walking one night with my sister. We were passing a familiar point on the road when suddenly we both found ourselves about 200 meters back the way we had just come, approaching the familiar point for the second time. She turned to me and said, "What just happened?" We both experienced exactly the same thing, like we had just been pulled back 20 seconds in time, and neither of us could explain it. No spooky GG ghosts, but a lasting feeling of something deeply unnatural having happened. So this is a story from my family. When my mom was a young girl growing up in Vietnam, she had this weird dream about being in a darkened church. Everyone was talking in hushed tones, but it was English, so she didn't understand what was going on. But she remembered certain details, like the stained glass windows and the baptismal font. She told her parents, but they were kinda dismissive. They just told her it was a weird dream. A few years later, she was forced to flee South Vietnam because of the Vietnam War. Her family relocated to Florida, and they started their life over. About 10 years later, she went to the local Catholic church for her younger sister's confirmation. And suddenly she realized it was the same church she had dreamed of as a child. The same darkened church, the same stained glass, the same baptismal font. She talked to her parents again and they remembered her having the dream and describing the place exactly. Maybe some of it is altered memory, but it's one of our family legends. I would swear crap like that actually happens a lot. I don't believe in any of that stuff, but when my dreams become reality just a day or two later, it makes me wonder. Edit. I can't spell. I saw a UFO once. I grew up in a really small town, population around 500. That was the only thing besides cornfields and emptiness between a bigger city and an Air Force base. One night I was sitting around playing minors when my mother came rushing up the porch and into the house screaming that a UFO had followed her all the way home. Naturally, my dad and I just kinda laughed. Then we saw the look on her face and bolted outside. There was what can only be described as a very round, smooth version of the B-2 bomber. It was this creepy metallic and shiny color. It would look near invisible unless you were right under it, and it would reflect back this huge fog from the ground, light bouncing back off of it. Also, I was probably 10 years old or so. My memory and judgment of distance could be faulty, but as I recall, the aircraft was almost totally silent and only traveling around 40 miles per hour. I realize aircraft cannot sustain lift at that speed, but honestly my father and I followed it in a car for as long as we could, ran out of road, and were easily able to keep pace with the thing. From my memory, the design was clearly a newer version of an already existing US military aircraft, but it was still freaky as all heck. Aircraft can travel at 40 miles per hour. It just depends how you design them. Lift at 40 miles per hour is perfectly possible. You have been visited by the Lord of the Good Boys. Comment who's a good boy to instantly become part of the Good Boy Squad. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.